Okay. Classroom management because, oh, look at that. My camera. You know what? I'll leave it alone. It's a good topic to talk about in a synchronous way because I think we'll start. We'll probably deviate, go out on tangents, which is fine. But I want to talk a little bit about the case that I asked you to look at about poor Jill. Somebody want to tell me about Jill in 30 seconds? What's Jill's dilemma?
Do you mean I thought Jill was the special education teacher.
I'm sorry. Did I? I'm not.
The main character doesn't seem to have a name.
One of my close friends, Jill, was the part-time. Would you give me a list of children? Oh yeah, the narrator. Let's call her the narrator.
Okay.
Sorry. So what do we think about the narrator? Is it you know? Is it reality? Is it all made up? What do we think? Is this? Can we relate? What do we think?
Well, I had a lot of thoughts. I typed like 4 pages of stuff, but
okay.
I don't know. Sometimes I come across pretty strongly, so I don't want to offend anyone.
Oh no, please. There's certainly won't offend me. So
okay. Well, I think that the narrator, there's some choices she could have made that would have been better. Like in my experience teaching, don't try to have a substantive, serious conversation in the faculty room because that just brings drama. Another thing, she could have started asking for help from administration earlier while the student was demonstrating consistent behavioral problems. But at the end of the day, she did not do anything objectively wrong with relation to her friend or her coworker, Jill. And I just had a whole lot of negative things to say about Jill after reading this.
Okay, let me hold off on Jill for a minute. Let's talk about, I love you brought up the faculty room. Potentially one of the toughest places in a school building to be. I don't know, how are all of you, all of you teaching right now, or will be teaching in the fall? Yeah, I see some head shaking. Okay. I'm not a big fan of the faculty room. I never have been a big fan of the faculty room because you never walk out feeling, wow, that was great to sit in there for 20 minutes. It's there are times I've actually called it poisonous because I don't eat in there. I don't go in there unless I have to, I absolutely must. So you have to take everything you see and hear and experience in any faculty room with a grain of salt. And I think that's a good point. What do we think? Why are we so upset about Jill?
And I don't know if they're raising a hand.
No, yeah, go right ahead. You can either raise your hand, you can just kind of go like this, that's fine.
Okay, awesome.
Go right.
So Jill, first of all, it says that they were like, so I guess she, the narrator believed that she was giving her important information regarding a student, and that would basically help her with this student. She's the special education expert, and so I guess she thought she was going to get some type of advisement with this child. But when I was reading it, I was trying to look at the red flags. And the first red flag I saw was that it was a behavior issue, but the other teacher had it under control and used these steps for this child. Every child, every year could be different with a different teacher. And so maybe that's, one thing that went wrong. You have to use your own strategies. After a while, she noticed that the strategies that the prior teacher was using And then I think she went, like the gentleman did say, she should have gone to administration first. That she was a special education teacher. You would ask the advisement of someone who deals with children who have behavior issues or have special needs, or, you know, who's familiar with the child, but she wasn't giving, you know, she wasn't getting the advice that she needed.
Mm-hmm. Good point about, you know, when is an appropriate time to go to the administration. From a classroom management standpoint, I'm always, it should be a last resort. For something like this with a special ed, totally different. From a discipline standpoint, I never, ever let anyone fight my battles unless it's something I absolutely either cannot control or it's way out of my hands. I've seen teachers that will call, you know, on the radio for, you know, I need a dean or I need an assistant principal to come to my room because basically I've lost control and I need someone to get control back in my room. You're done as a teacher at that point. And you know, unless you have real strict union guidelines that say, you know, if the kids get to a certain point, you just call the administration. That's tough. From this standpoint, with, you know, from a special ed standpoint, the more information you have and you can gather from anyone, I think that's helpful. Whether it's, you know, is the administration aware if this is a student, you know, issue from multiple years? You know, is there someone, you know, is case manager, you know, is this student new to special ed? And sometimes if they're undiagnosed, or if they're in process of being tested and evaluated, someone might have an idea. So that's certainly, in that case, it's a good resource. One of the most difficult skills as a teacher you are going to have to learn, and, you know, you might know it already, is the ability to be a detective. You know, when you see a kid who's struggling, or you see a kid displaying something out of the ordinary, you know, how do you deal with that? How do you go, is there something, you know, is there something here that I'm missing? Is there a could this child have a learning disability that no one picked up on? You know, and maybe you're the teacher that's going to pick up on it. Whether it's something as simple as, you know, I'm sorry?
From any trauma or things like that, like a family background, like that's necessary as well.
Al, sorry to interrupt. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
I could do that. I've lost him.
It's coming in and out, like it breaks up and then it goes away again.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Now, where was I? One of the sources you might look at too are Cume notes. Do any of you required to keep cumulative notes on your students?
What type of notes?
Cumulative, like student fell asleep today in class for 10 minutes. Student was acting erratically, you know, and have to write, you know.
Anecdotal notes?
I'm sorry?
Notes.
Yeah, it's different places have different names for them, but you know, some people just make annotations like in their plan books, and they might, you know, or in their grade books, and say, you know, when they have issues with a, you know, with a student, but that's a good way too. And talking to teachers that have had students, that you have to also take with a grain of salt. There are times where teachers have told me, "Oh, I had this kid last year. He was or she was awful," and you kind of have to experience that for yourself. I'm not about to let someone, sway my opinion on a student until I've actually encountered, him or her for a while. But yeah, being that detective is so important. What are is the student displaying any outward signs of anything? And it could be something minor. It could be, I was only with some people last weekend, and their one daughter had Asperger's, and I would have never picked it out. None of the stereotypical classical signs of Asperger's, but yet the girl had a full-blown diagnosis. So it really depends on you, and it's something you really have to hone in on and be good at, because you might be the one to pick out something that no one else does. What else about Jill? What else about our is well, the narrator is in a bad spot, but what about Jill? Do we think Jill is friend or foe?
Definitely foe.
Okay, do tell. What do we think about Jill?
Observes like she was supposed to. Well, like she was promised. She complained about caseload, and it just wasn't very helpful for a teacher who needed help.
I typed
needed help.
Yeah.
Okay.
I typed a bunch of stuff, but I don't want to bore everyone by reading.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I guess I'll just keep it shorter. There's not a single thing in this entire example that would indicate to me that she is good at what she does. At first, the first thing she does is says, "This worked last year with a different teacher." And the other student was saying, well, this is a different teacher in a different classroom in a different year. That may not work anymore. Their brain changes over time. And she was very hands-off. She never came to observe anything. Also, for someone who's supposed to be a special education teacher, she had no curiosity as to whether this student might have some sort of issue that needs to be tested for. Instead, she just blames the teacher, which is, sometimes it is the teacher's fault, but even when it is, it's not helpful to just, without looking into the situation, automatically assume it's the teacher. Then after all is said and done and the student is diagnosed with a problem and it's discovered and judged that it's not the teacher's fault, Jill does not apologize. She doesn't admit that she was wrong. So everything in this entire example indicates to me that she does not have the perception, the temperament, or the character to be doing the job that she has the title for. But that's my opinion.
And that's, what, I think I'm hoping I think I heard the word, and if I didn't hear it, Jill's almost a bully.
Yeah.
And I've said for a long time, and there, you can certainly feel free to disagree, that we need HIB for teachers. It's bad enough that we have HIB laws to protect the kids, but we need HIB laws to protect the teachers from one another. Because there is in some places, it's a real concern how teachers treat one another. And I like Jill's example here because it brings out real life stuff. This is not, there are places where, if you are, for example, if you're not unionized, or if you're non-tenured, excuse me, you have a union but you're not tenured, you're nothing. There are places where even if you come in and you're tenured, but you're still, 4 or 5 years in, you're a youngin, if you will, you're ostracized. So it's a very difficult sometimes path, that we take as teachers, because you never really know how you're going to be treated, and sometimes very simple mistakes can turn into bombshells.
Yep.
I think that that Jill was being very inappropriate by talking in front of the other the teacher and the principal. Like that was not like that was so mean. Like she called her out in front of everyone. And I think that the music teacher should have also voiced her concerns about um, Jill because she also had behavior issues as well.
Hmm.
Like they should have came together as a group to try to help the child, not just attack a teacher.
Sure. How many of you do you do level meetings at your school where you meet with other teachers in the same grade and talk about the kids?
Yes.
I do it in my school.
Yeah, it's some do it. We used to. I haven't had in a number of years, but they were helpful because let's say all the freshman teachers or the freshman math teachers or whatever would sit down and talk. Are we having issues? This kid is not doing well in English. Is he doing bad in science or in social studies? And as much as it sounds like demeaning because we're talking about the kids, it made perfect sense because then you realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm seeing the same pattern of behavior, or I'm seeing the same problems. He's not doing homework. He's not doing this. He's falling asleep, whatever the case is. So those can be very helpful when you have level meetings, to talk about.
Appropriate setting.
I'm sorry?
It's good.
That's
an appropriate setting to have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think if there's, and I don't know if I say it in jest, but when you're having a meeting to talk about the kids, and I think that's totally appropriate. There are times where talking about the students is highly inappropriate, but in cases like this, it's, hey, listen, I have a student who, is demonstrating this behavior or doing this. I had a kid a couple of years ago, and I work in a Catholic school, who had Asperger's, but no one told me. And the way I figured it out was after I asked him the first time if he, where's his homework, he got all mad that he forgot it, and he started swearing like a sailor. I'm like, okay, wouldn't have expected that from you. But after 3 days of this, I'm like, wait a minute, this is not right. And sure enough, mom and dad had him tested. Maybe when he was in 8th grade, he was in 12th grade now. And they're like, oh, he's fine. No, he's not, So I go back to that. You being a detective as a teacher, you being aware, it's just so important because ultimately a lot of you might catch something that no one else sees or no one else has experienced. I had a kid in the past year that was diagnosed as ADD and oppositionally defiant. The ADD, maybe, but I didn't see the ODD, and it just didn't come out like your typical, I'm going to sit, with my hands crossed and be defiant. He was defiant in a way of just, I'm not doing my homework. Very simple, like not, angry, but just defiant. So, looking at, and part of why you're looking at different learning disabilities is hopefully to get a glimpse into, there's so much out there that you have to be aware of as teachers. What else? The second question that's under question, should a teacher begin the year by following the exact programs and systems used successfully by a child's previous teacher or special ed teacher? As a teacher, do you pick up where you left off or do you start new? What do we think?
I think that at first you can start off with the old procedures and then develop some of your own as you go along. I think.
Okay.
Personally, as like a general rule of thumb, I would say that it's okay to try that and see if it works. But for my own personal classroom, I would want to see the student and get a feel for them and all the specifics before I take some sort of action or plan. I know that that specific thing that they tried with him with a piece of paper on his desk, I mean, I have ADHD, and that would have probably made it worse for me. I would not have responded well to that. In fact, I would have preferred more if a teacher had put everyone's name on the board and put a mark next to their name whenever they interrupted the class or something than to have a piece of paper on my desk, because then I'm going to feel disoriented. There's too many things going on. What does these marks mean in relation to everyone else in the classroom?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I thought that, I guess my personal tendency would be to wait and see what I experience from that student and how they are in my classroom before I do anything. But I guess I can't say that there's a problem with starting out with something someone else did if you have, like no clue about what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on the.
Very positive.
Go ahead,
It wasn't
explain.
positive how.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I lost you. I got it wasn't very positive. Then I lost you.
I said it wasn't a very positive approach for improving his behavior. The check marks that indicated that every time he misbehaved, that he saw every single day, is not very positive. It should have been the exact opposite if they were going to implement some type of behavior strategy. Every time he did something that was positive, maybe put that down instead, and then an award if that was the procedure. And just as Michael was saying, that it was using Pryor's behavior management system. If we all start, if a teacher starts with her own, and then she'll build from there.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure I like, it's one thing that I'd like to see the kids as their own, and I don't want them to, if they're carrying anything over, I want to start the year fresh. But at the same time too, some kids need structure, need routine, need they might need the paper on their desk. I grew up, I went to Catholic school my whole life, and discipline was, it didn't matter if, I remember, God, Mike, there was like there's a thing on the board, it said detention, and your name would go up there. There was no thought about my self-esteem and my privacy and how I would feel if I was singled out in the class. That was it. And this was the 1980s, that was it. I can still remember in 5th grade being, I got in trouble before school started, and me and my buddy, we were running around, and sister came down, and both of us ended up sitting on the bench up near the main office, which was an old church pew, for like a month. And let me tell you, I never, when I got back to be able to stand in line again, I stood there like a statue, But in that, looking back, and I'm not that old, but looking back at that, like how different we are in terms of how we run our classrooms and what we think about the kids. I don't know if I know Maslow was around in the 1980s, but certainly none of my teachers ever, thought about the lower, part of Maslow's hierarchy with my, my physical needs. And, if I was hungry, thirsty, had to go to the bathroom, they didn't care. And somehow I learned, but I think we've really looked at, what the kids feel, what is education like from the student's perspective. And for a while, I mean, we've never really thought that. And that's important too. And most importantly in special ed, what does this student need? You didn't have, when I was a kid, it wasn't ADD. You just had teachers would say you have ants in your pants, or you were fidgety, sit still. And there wasn't a thought of, oh, this kid needs to stand up and potentially maybe walk around the room or take a break or whatever. It wasn't, and I think we're very good now about individualized learning, which is so important. And you really can't not use that approach when you're, and how you manage a classroom, because you've got, every kid is a unique kid who learns differently and who's got different needs. I like question 3. Was I wrong to take so much personal offense at the incident with Jill in the teacher's lounge? Was this teacher being overreactive?
I don't think so. I think that she was right to feel the way she did. Like, if a teacher's like basically she was looking down at her about her classroom management skills right for the principal. So I feel like that was not okay, especially if she was her friend. Like, she knows really mean. I'd be even more mad. I would confront her.
No, that's fine. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would have. I might have taken offense. If you throw me under the bus like that, I am going to take offense. And I think Jill's got every right to, at a minimum, be upset. As I said before, it's sometimes education be very cutthroat, and as I like that this case study brings that to the forefront, because if you are a new teacher, if you're new to teaching, if you're in a couple of years, even if you're seasoned, you always have to watch out for politics and how political things are. Very, very important. That could bite you if you don't really consider it. So anything else? Anybody else?
Comment on something?
Oh, absolutely.
I thought the principal should have stepped in, to be honest with you, a little bit, and not let Jill talk to the narrator like that. So that's just my opinion, because Jill was kind of out of line with that. So, and being a principal of the school, I feel like she should have said something.
No, you know what? That's a good point there. You really can't. While you can't take sides at the same time, if you've got one staff member almost demeaning another one, that's not going to work. And I think that potentially is going to make things a lot worse if you can't get control over stuff like that. It'll become a lot worse for the narrator. It'll become worse for Jill, because at some point, I think, if you're a teacher and you're out of line, you got to be put in your place. It's the same way you'd expect the same thing with the students. If the kid's out of line, they get disciplined, and I think it's the same for the teachers. Otherwise, it becomes a free for all. I absolutely agree. I think the principal should have said something. Anybody else about was the narrator wrong?
I don't think the narrator was wrong. I think the behavior was very inappropriate.
Okay. Let's see which question I want to look at.
I would agree too. I would say she wasn't wrong to feel that way, but I would caution her against being friends and coworkers don't always go well together. And I think that if anyone you are working with, you should not allow yourself to become that emotionally invested in that person, because I've seen a lot of, I work at a very large school. We have a lot of great people, a lot of not great people, and I've seen a lot of political stuff. And when administrators or teachers, they get buddy-buddy, that can lead to deficiencies in getting the job done, because they're just looking out for each other instead of looking at what's best for the whole school. And then I've also seen where people who are friends, they end up on either side of, for example, I was like this. There was a teacher I really liked. There were two teachers in another department I really liked. And then all of a sudden, one of them was kind of caught out with the administration, and I kind of had to pick sides, and I was like, whoa, and then one of them got fired, and then the other one, we just stopped talking. I was like, and I didn't even do anything. I wasn't even involved with it, but just, I would caution this narrator to not allow herself to become emotionally invested friend-wise with anyone that she works with, just because stuff like this happens. People's work life gets in between your friendship, and it doesn't always go well.
How many of you have colleagues as social media friends, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, right? I mean, you do, but then all of a sudden, what if those friends, all of a sudden something happens and they're not your friends anymore, it's very sometimes tough to separate work and pleasure, work and play, whatever you want to call it. And I think, I think Michael's got a good point that, sometimes, making, you got to be careful of who you trust. Let's put it that way. Whether you call that person a friend or not, I'm not going to say something confidential to somebody else that I work with unless I absolutely trust them that they will not repeat it. And that's depending on the subject and the person, very difficult. Because there are times you want to talk with people. You might want to say, hey, listen, I had this run-in with Jill. I don't know what to do. I need some advice. And then that person goes and says something to Jill or anybody for that matter. So I think that you got to be careful. You got to be careful with who you associate with. And I'm not saying all your colleagues are evil people, but you just got to be careful. Got to be careful with that. You got to be careful with your social media. If you're a friend with another teacher, I'm always cautious about who's taking pictures, and where that picture is going to end up. As a teacher, we're supposed to be role models, and you got to be careful with that too, because Jill brings out an excellent example that sometimes you can't, you can't trust everybody, and sometimes people will throw you under the bus and have ulterior motives. So you really have to be careful. Anything that the narrator could do to improve the relationship with Jill? Is there anything to improve? Is it dead in the water? Is it savable? What do we think? Or are we done with Jill?
I don't have much classroom. I don't have any classroom experience. I'm not in the classroom yet, but just from being out working or in any type of environment that you have to work with someone, I would think that you would just need to, or you're gonna cross paths and you're gonna have other kids in your class where you may just find that place where you can. I would want to be able to be civil. You may run into other situations where you have other kids in both classes that you need to somewhat discuss at some point or another.
Yeah, you have to be very careful about.
You have to be very careful about
what you say, how you say it.
what you say, how you say it.
That's definitely important. Anybody else with anything? Any other thoughts or concerns about Jill, the narrator? Anything about poor Joe? We haven't talked about Joe a lot. How does Joe fare in all this? Should anything change with Joe?
I think Joe benefited in the long run in this example because a formal problem of his was diagnosed, and now adequate steps can be taken to assist him. And this, again, I just see this as further evidence that Jill, if I were the principal, should be fired because she's a special education teacher. She had no interest in even looking at this kid on her own to see if he may have had a problem, yet the new teacher who has no experience, who was blamed for him, all the problems that he was going through, is the one who ended up pushing for this to happen, and it happened, and he's better off because of it. I mean, I really see how, Jill should, in my opinion, be fired because she missed this, and she had terrible reaction to it, and I think in the long run, he benefited from it. I will say, however, though, from his what was said about him is that the parents are a problem as well.
Okay, why so?
The reason I say that is because they're telling the teacher one thing and not holding up their bargain. Okay, they are not disciplining him at home like they promised he would. And a teacher, in many ways, can only be as effective as the parents and the administration allow them to be. Second, another flag went up when I read that the parents were arguing with another teacher about the curriculum. And in my experience, these things are telling me, okay, this is an enabler. These parents, whether they know it or not, their parenting style is to, whenever their child is doing something, is to defend the child instead of correct the child. I can very easily see where one of their kids comes home and says, I don't like this material, or my teacher's terrible. And instead of, any number of other responses, the responses my parents would have had, the parent responds by calling to the school and complaining about the teacher and wanting to fight the teacher on everything. Now, sometimes the teacher is a problem, but we shouldn't assume that. And then I was not at all surprised then when later on in the example, it said that there was some big confrontation or something that she had with the parents. That, again, it was not surprising. It was all building up to the fact that the parents are enabling their kids' behavior. Now, he does have ADHD, and that does, present its own problems, but the parents are not, it can be mitigated through choices and discipline, and they are not doing anything to help that.
Yeah, and you have to remember in this whole puzzle, and any type of puzzle, especially with the kids, you have to remember the parents, and what role the parents in all this. My son has hearing loss. I use an FM system. I'll do whatever I have to. There's been times I've been, I'll pitch my tent on the schoolhouse lawn if I have to, and until I get an answer about something, or no one else is going to fight. No one's going to fight for my kid except for me. And not every family is like that. Some parents won't. Some people won't want their child stigmatized, which I don't understand. I don't understand. When I was a kid, I remember I had to go on the speech bus because I had a problem with my L's, and I went once a week. And there was in a Catholic school at the time, they didn't do services in the building, so there was a trailer that it was like a resource room, but it was a trailer, and that's what you were you refer to as, if you went to the trailer, I remember that you were called dumb. That's what it was. There was a stigma, and kids were like, I don't want to go to the trailer because I don't want my friends to call me dumb. It's different now. Like I first of all, I could care less what you say about my kid. If he's getting what he needs, then you can label him whatever you want. And I'm certainly not embarrassed to say that he gets, special services. Not at all. But I'm the one who's going to fight for that. My wife and I, whenever we have IEP meetings, that's what we have to do. And our district is good. They've been very supportive, but and that's not the case all the time. And you really have to. No one's going to fight for your kid except for you as a parent. And ultimately, there are times I've seen where kids got a diagnosed learning disability. We want to provide services, and the parents say no. Either I don't want him or her tested, or I don't want services. How frustrating is that as a teacher?
No, it's all, I think that when people, they don't want their kid to be labeled or something, it's not the labeling. Like there's an example in another class we were talking about where I'm taking in. This parent doesn't want her kid to be tested because she doesn't want him to think that he's different from everyone else. And my reaction to that was, okay, well, because it's about having a reading problem, reading disability. Okay, this is the 21st century. If you can't read proficiently, you're going to be crippled in every single thing you do. You cannot be a healthy, happy, functioning adult in the 21st century if you cannot read proficiently. So are you more concerned about his not feeling different, or more concerned that he will be able to be a happy, functioning adult? Because the ability to learn to read diminishes the older you get. So the longer we wait to start addressing his problem, the worse off he will be for the rest of his life. And I think that we need to ask ourselves, what is in the true best interest of this child instead of what makes us feel good? That's just where I'm from. That's how we think.
Kind of think sometimes I have a 5-year-old that's going into an LLD program in September. So I go to the IEP meetings and things like that. And I just think, though, being on this side does help as a parent. Taking classes now, not necessarily being in a classroom yet, but I think it helps open your eyes to a lot of things that I may not have known or realized before. And going into those meetings can see how it's difficult, though, on the parent end, where if you're not haven't done your research, or where you can kind of be a little intimidated. So I try to do whatever I can for him and get him whatever services I can, but this whole process of being in the master's program has opened my eyes to a lot of things that I don't know necessarily that it would have if I wasn't doing this and was just the parent of a child that has it helps just from the parent's perspective.
And I look at the teaching, teacher preparation, that as a whole, a lot of programs don't prepare teachers, for like an MST program with special ed. You get a little bit of it in ed psych, you might get some of it in methodology, but you're not getting formal special ed training, which is something that teachers, it's such a necessity to have, especially today, understanding, how do I deal with a kid with accommodations? How do I teach, how do I identify learning disabilities? How do I work with accommodations? How do I accommodate kids that are in process of being tested, but, or maybe have, some type of learning need, but haven't been evaluated yet? How do you deal with all that? That's really important. And I see a lot of programs where that's just not present. And I know, like, when I went through my alternate route, I didn't have it. I mean, other than what we talked about, there was no formal training in that kind of stuff. And I think as teachers, that's the front line of defense before special services, before guidance. It's it's the teacher. You see, you see behaviors and patterns and all that. So, but I agree with you. That I'm certainly a lot more aware, because I went through the same program. I went through the leadership programs. I started in 2009, and I feel the same way. There was a lot of things that I just never thought of and never considered until I was forced to. And I think I'm a better parent in that regard of having a son with special needs because I went through this than if I didn't.
Well, I'm glad that she said that, because that's not something that really occurred to me, is being overwhelmed with it as a parent, or just learning about it now, because I was diagnosed with 5 separate learning disabilities when I was in high school. And so I guess for most of my conscious life, it's been something I've dealt with. So the idea that someone may have a child, but that doesn't know how to approach this, I guess that will affect my future dealings with parents of my students that I deal with, and understanding their perspective. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about Mr. Holland and Mr. Holland's opus. Remember, his son was deaf, and how long it took him to come to grips with that, that his son was deaf. I think as a teacher, and part of this is just experience, part of it is just the more you do this and the more you're exposed to as a teacher, the more you just, call it a toolbox. There's just more stuff that you accumulate, and more information, experience you have on looking at certain things, on if you encounter. I remember a kid the first year I was teaching, that was, because of his last name was Z, sat in the back of the room, and all the kid did for so my first year teaching, he sat there like this. And it finally occurred to me to ask him, like, Greg, can you see the board? No, I can't. What if I put you in the front? Oh, we could see the board now, And it wasn't, he was too proud to say I can't see the board, so he sat there like this every day. It only took me a month to realize he couldn't see, but it was my first year teaching. Now I'm much more in tune with that kind of stuff because I've experienced it. I know what a kid with ADD might look like, or oppositional defiance, or Asperger's, or dyscalculia, or dyspraxia, or dysgraphia. I don't know how many of you do. As soon as I get the opportunity, I like to, especially the younger kids, let them write. First day of school, what I do on my summer vacation, write a paragraph, and I look at the handwriting, I look at how they hold the pen, I'm looking at, can they formulate a sentence? I'm looking at all. It's one of my favorite assessments to do, and you could really do it in almost any grade level, is what I do on my summer vacation and write it, because I see, and my daughter does it, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to correct her. I don't have a pen. I'm going to use the tripod for the camera. Like she holds I see people who hold like their pens like this, or kind of like, my nephew does something like this, and I'm like, I remember I had to hold it like this, and sister bought me the little thing that slid over my pen to force me to hold it like this, because I used to do this, and that was just, so I still have nightmares. Like, I got to hold it like this, but that's one of those things that I would have never thought to looking at how the kids hold the pen, then looking at handwriting and looking at, wow, is this appropriate for a kindergartner, first grader, second grader? And depending on whatever grade level it is you teach, even if it's high school, what should students be able to do when they're coming in? So, excuse me, at the end of the previous grade level, and what should they know how to do now by the end of the current grade level? And that you can kind of judge, well, these kids are on grade level, they're reading at grade level, they're performing their mathematical ability is grade level, whatever, or they're not. And again, that's part of you as a teacher being able to do that.
Can anyone hear me?
Go ahead.
Because I couldn't unmute, I wanted to chime in. You can hear me?
Go right ahead. Yeah, I can. Go ahead, Celine. Right ahead.
I'm sorry. I wanted to chime in like comments ago.
No, go right ahead.
I'm a special education teacher. I'm a special education teacher. I've been teaching now for 15 years. And so my current position, I was a resource teacher. And I can't tell you how many teachers who were even general education teachers who have asked me to observe a student. I wanted to bring that up before.
Mm-hmm.
They asked me to see, well, does this look right? Or do you think he has an issue here? Or can you perform a running record with him? And I did these things as favors. Did I have to? No, I did not. I didn't have any of these kids on my caseload,
Mm-hmm.
but I did it as far as to give advisement to the teacher. I'm so late with the comments, but I couldn't get my computer to work. The narrator and Jill and everyone else was a novice teacher, and she should have been instructed to go to IRNS. That is, but IRNS is basically intervention referral. If you see a bunch of red flags in a child, you want to refer them to the IRNS team. Not to go into all that, but I'm sure you guys know that. But go to an administrator, you'll do that first. And perhaps maybe that's what the narrator should have done if she was instructed to do so. But if it was in older students like my middle schoolers, which is departmentalized, a lot of the issues, the science teacher has the same issue as the math teacher and the English teacher. The child seems to have issues in every class. So one of those teachers would say, you know what, I need to refer him because there must be an issue here. So that's, do that prior to even going to administration. I know it was a comment that about building relationships with your coworkers. Some of them, my coworkers, I need a balance. An LLD teacher, I was an inclusion teacher, and I went from room to room to room. From pre-K to 8th grade, I was a special education teacher. So I kind of needed to build some type of relationship with the teachers. You know, because we taught, you know, mostly every single day. So it had to be, you know, a teaching marriage, as they call it, so the classroom can run properly. But I think, you know, the best, you have to kind of balance it and still be professional, but not be, you know, not so sociable. You kind of have to work with people, especially if you have that type of position.
Yeah, I mean, everything's well said. The INRS is definitely, and I wasn't even thinking of that myself. As a great, you know, beginning, of, you know, hey, is anybody else seeing a problem? And then what do we potentially do? Is there something that we might be able to correct just with, you know, a change in seating, or, you know, I remember somebody telling me that a student, it was a math teacher, someone in the kid would get overwhelmed with test, you know, oh my God, all these problems and all that. So the teacher took the same test, that kid got his own copy, and she put one problem per page on the test. 20 questions, 20 pages. Everybody else maybe got 2 pages. Same test, but the kid didn't get overwhelmed because there was one problem on the page. It was an INRS strategy. Brilliant. He didn't need evaluation. He didn't need a referral to the child study team. This kid just needed, he processed information differently, you know, and that kind of stuff. Your INRS committees, you know, those of you that are in public schools, huge, you know, and really something that private schools could model and have, you know, and have something like that to, you know, to assist teachers with, well, what can I do? You know, because in Catholic schools, there's not a lot we can do. There's not a lot of supplemental services we have. But what can I do? You know, I know this kid is diagnosed with this disability. You know, how do I teach someone with this disability? You know, and that's something that, too, I know certainly in the private schools, we don't really entertain. But if I've got a kid with Asperger's, how do I teach that? How do I teach that student? You know, if, you know, how do I teach a student, or how do I, let's see, how do I allow a student, you know, who maybe has dysgraphia, you know, and has really poor handwriting, how do I allow him or her to express himself other than, or herself, other than writing? You know, my son uses an FM system. So when I went in to read to his class a couple months ago, the first thing I did was I had my hand out for the teacher. I'm like, I want the FM system, you know, because I know what it's for. You know, like that's, to me, that's a no-brainer, you know. We have to realize as teachers that kids learn differently. We have to realize as teachers that, you know, even a minor modification might help. It might go a long way. So sometimes it's worth it, you know, to make 20 pages of a test, or, you know, for seating wise. There are kids that'll tell me, listen, I got to sit in the front. Why? Can you not see? No, I don't want to get distracted. I don't want to get in trouble. You know, I know who's in the class. I can't sit by the window. I want to be right in front of you so I can't get in trouble. Okay. You know, I think you really have to, you know, put yourself in the shoes of the learner. And then you really get an idea for what's best for the learner, wherever that road goes, whether it's INRS, whether it's an evaluation, whether it's I just need to, you know, tweak what I do. You know, I just think that that little bit goes a long way. Any other thoughts about Jill, the narrator, Joe? Anything we've talked about? I'm watching I have my next class starting at 9 o'clock, so I'm watching my my time. Anybody? Any closing thoughts? Somebody's getting anxious.
I have a question.
Sure.
So,
go ahead, Michael.
I agree with everything you said. But I also, because I'm from Texas, and the Texas model, I graduated high school in 2007, and the Texas model, at least then, was, you know, you don't question the teacher, it's the student's fault, you know, all these things. It's very disciplinarian.
Corporal punishment is still legal in Texas, right?
I don't know. No, at least not in the public school system.
I was going to say, because that's always been the stereotype of of Texas, that it's
Yeah.
if you're out of line, you just get paddled or something. So
Well, you don't get paddled, but you get removed. There was a special school that they sent you to
okay.
if you were a problem. But
Go ahead.
I think that all of this movement we have toward understanding individual students and their needs and things is positive. But I also wonder if sometimes we don't. I'm worried about sometimes going too far into the other direction, to where we don't have a real standard for students when they could, in fact, perform at the level we want them to perform or do what we want them to do. But they have learned that all they have to do is say, I can't do that. And then we immediately, because children are manipulative and they don't even do it intentionally. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I would come up with all kinds of stuff just because I learned that if I say the right things, I get what I want. Now I'm more conscious of my thoughts, and I've learned not to do that. But like, I know a lot of teachers, not just here in New Jersey, but elsewhere, that don't believe that ADD is a real thing because it's been so overdiagnosed in many places. And it's like a scapegoat. Oh, this child's misbehaving. Oh, they have ADD. They can't be held accountable for their choices. Well, I have ADD, I have ADHD, and several other things. But when I was in the 4th grade, all right, my teacher asked a question, and I knew the answer, so I was all excited. 4th grade, I blurted out the answer. And instead of saying, good job, my teacher turned around, he scowled at me, he gave me a yellow piece of paper that said, I broke the rules, I had to go home and have my parents sign it, then my parents grounded me for a week.
Because you called out in class.
Because a 4th grader called out in class, yeah. And you know what? Today, people say, oh, that's terrible. And yeah, maybe it's a little harsh. Maybe it's a little overreaction. But guess what? I learned how to control myself. I think we sometimes undervalue negative reinforcement. Now, obviously, you can go too far the other way.
Sure.
Like the way people were in the 80s. You don't want to be hitting anyone. Or like humiliating. I would never agree with humiliating a student or anything. But I think that I'm worried sometimes that the standards are dropping because we're afraid to have actual consequences because of 1,000 excuses.
I agree.
And so outside of the realm of special education, like, where is the line, do we think or feel, between when it's appropriate to force a child to conform to a standard versus when we're supposed to let them kind of do their own thing?
Class?
That comes with experience. That part of that just comes with experience. It comes with, classroom. After your first year of teaching, you could kind of answer your question. What can you allow your students to do that will enforce? How are they learning from the situation? You have to look at it that way. And again, that comes with like years of experience. You might not get it the first year, to the third year, but each year you're kind of graduating to that. To say, okay, this didn't work last year, I'm going to try this year. And each year you're going to learn that you're going to get a set of new students, new brains, new issues. Everything's going to be brand new. And so you're going to learn how to see if children are going to call out, or see if children are going to sit in their seats and be quiet while you're in instruction, or do you want them to chime in and talk to you? You're going to learn those different strategies that you're able to provide that class management, that you can say, okay, I was an effective teacher. I was an effective teacher, and he effectively learned this skill because I allowed him to do this. You were able to see it out. But I totally understand when you gave your personal story about you getting a letter home because you called out, and that teacher's experience was for you was everyone needed to be totally or be totally quiet and wait and have their hands up. And that's your teacher's strategy. And you broke that rule. And although you were very excited about it, and you gave the right answer, that broke the teacher's. So he needed that discipline in his classroom. You know what I'm saying? He needed that. So I guess that applies to, we have to learn what is our classroom management system look like. You always got to think about how effective you're going to be as a teacher and as an instructor. How to do that, you know, on your own. It could look totally different with me. It look different if you walk in my classroom. I have children who have all kinds of disabilities, multiple disabilities, behavior, emotional, learning. But my classroom might be, what I accept might be different from the classroom next door. You know what I'm saying?
And that's very true as well, because we talk a lot about, we all have to be, you know, uniform and fair in how we enforce discipline and whatnot. But it's true that there's, from class to class, it could be very different based on the what's in front of you. I let my kids eat and drink in class. I break the rules. I do it all the time. I've been doing it for years. No glass. You drink, but you know what? I look at, you know, my seniors don't go to lunch on a normal day until 12:45. I'm eating lunch. If I make it to 11 o'clock, that's a good thing. You know, I get up at 5. I'm starving. And I can't in good conscience let them sit there. So you want a snack? Go right ahead and eat. Just don't make a mess. You know, maybe there's a reason I teach at the far ends of the building. But, you know, like I look at, that's a small price for me to pay. You know what? If they're going to be more productive because they're, you know, drinking water, or if they're drinking Gatorade or whatever, fine. You know, there's worse things in life. But I tell them, is if you make a mess, you're done. You're not doing it anymore. But I can still remember how many times, you know, I had gym, and the period after gym, the only thing I thought about was the water fountain, and how I couldn't get enough water. If I finally got to go out the water fountain, I would have to stand there, drink some more, because I was thirsty, and then I go back to class and be miserable. So you know what? Bring a bottle of water. What's the, you know, like I think, you know, we have to look at things as how they are. And I agree, sometimes we can't be fair and just say, oh, this is not allowed at all, because from class to class, there are different needs, you know, and different teachers have different thresholds too, as to what's considered off limits in my room may not be off limits in your room. You know, I remember when I was a kid, 1992, I was a freshman, there was a kid in my homeroom that had a beeper. And we were all like, oh my God, this is so cool. This kid must be a what? 1992. What?
Do you think he was a drug dealer?
Of course. He had a beeper. This was 1992. This kid was a drug dealer. And you know, I think he was. He only lasted like maybe 2 months. But, you know, this was like a clear violation of the rules. And even now, like, we have rules like for cell phones. You're not supposed to have them. They're supposed to be off. They're supposed to be in your locker. But you could do the same thing with your computer. You could do with your cell phone. So, like, we have to, you know, sometimes we just have to look at what we've said no to for all these years. You know, maybe there's bigger things that are more important that we should be saying, you know, that we should put our foot down. You know, I used to have like a page of rules whenever I taught. I had, you can't do this, can't do that. Now it's like, I think I have 3. Like, I want you to be on time. I can't stand when you walk in 5 minutes late. You get to class on time. You're engaged and you're involved with class while you're here, and you don't cheat. Everything else I could deal with. Everything else I'll figure out. But that's like unacceptable in my book. You know, whereas I used to be, don't call out, don't talk, don't do this, don't do it anymore. I'm a totally different teacher than I was when I first started, because I don't, you know, I think that as a teacher, I know, even from class to class, there are some classes where I could say, you know what, this is absolutely fine. There are some classes where the same rule I have to enforce a lot harder with another class.
So I guess the short answer that everyone seems to be agreeing on is teacher discretion. What you think is most effective for your classroom at that time. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would agree. I was curious because whenever I ask that question, I get a huge range of responses. So, but okay.
Yeah, and I agree. A lot of times it depends on the what's in front of you. You know, it's tough. It's tough to. It's also tough as teachers to enforce rules you don't agree with too. You know, and I've found that very difficult because there are times where I'm like, this is the dumbest rule I've ever heard of. And like, I kind of have to enforce it, but at the same time, it's like I can also, you know, oh yeah, don't do that. That's bad. So, you know, it depends, but that's tough too. So yeah, I think that you're all, you know, it's not something that's in the book. It's not something that there's a definite answer for, but it really depends on where you are and what you have in front of you. Any other closing thoughts? Any other ideas about anything in the case or anything we talked about tonight? Okay. Well, by the middle of next week, we're halfway through the course. Actually, more than halfway, because this is even shorter than the June session. So if you're behind on anything, you might want to make sure that you get caught up sooner rather than later. If you have questions, I know you've been just throwing them at me. I think I'm caught up with everybody with questions. If you still have questions for me, just throw them my way. If you are behind in anything, let's try and get that done hopefully by the end of the week. You know, if you need me for anything, reach out. Otherwise, I gotta prepare for my next class at 9 o'clock. And if anybody needs anything, I'll stick around for a minute or two. But if not, then thank you for participating tonight. I will have the link for the class if you want to watch a rerun up on YouTube probably by tomorrow. And that's it. Anybody else? Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
I gotta watch TV.
Shh, I'm done. Okay. Okay. Sorry about my kids.
Oh,
They're
please.
always going to be around.
Hi.
Not,
always.
bye.
Always.
Hi.